So first, I am very happy for this invitation. Yesterday, when I was preparing this presentation, I noticed that this is the first time that I will be talking about the findings of my research in my own language, which I think will make things easier. So I know that this has been a long morning. I've been in and out for the development of this event to hear what other speakers have shared with you. And I understand that there might be certain feel of tiredness because this is an online version, but I will try to make my best effort to share with you a summary of some studies in which I've been working in the last years and make it in a clear and straightforward manner. I will share the screen now. Hopefully you can see it now. Do you see the screen? Yes, we do. The name of my presentation is Violence Prevention and Delinquency Prevention. More school, less jails. To introduce this presentation, maybe I would like to tell you how I end up involved in these school issues. When I arrived and I started studying criminology, the idea was that criminologists felt at ease in the jails, in the criminal justice, working with police. But at that time, I thought it was strange that a criminologist found a place in the space of the school. The first work that I did had to do with bullying in the schools and how the way of violence is linked to other risk factors that are quite relevant, like drug abuse or guns. And that was a part of meta-analysis that I started my experience working in the school system. And from that experience and from a field work that I did in some schools of London, and due to the fact that I participated with a team of researchers that were researching on this place, we began to notice something that was quite interesting. Of course, schools are an educational space for human development where many positive things happen, but the school also, we have disruptive behaviors of different nature and different severity. And those behaviors, in one way or another, were a matter of interest for the analysis of criminology. Beyond that, we became aware, because it was something that was already new, that we noticed that the school for vulnerable children must be the only safe space that they know when their families are not safe spaces. We noticed in the first approach to the school system that the behavioral problems interfere with the learning process from the most vulnerable, from the least vulnerable, from the teachers, students, and they interfered with the security of all the people involved in this system. And something that made sense to me was the idea that the school, besides family, is a socialization, primary socialization system where besides the whole learning process, there is a close learning to the relationship that the adults have with the penal justice system. We learn about behavior codes in the school, we learn about the violations to infringements to the codes of conduct, and we learn in the school that that has a consequence. The consequences can have a wide range from punitive actions up to less punitive actions. We observe that in many cases, when the conflicts were severe, there was a lot of trust in the punishment. So we wonder, what does the theory tell us about punishment? And the theory, in terms of criminology of the punishment, is not as concluding as we might think. The theories, in the case of the deterrent theory, that says that the threat of punishment can inhibit the undesired behavior. So it might work. But there are other theories that, on the contrary, say that under certain conditions, such as the challenging behavior theory of Sherman, says that under certain conditions, punishment can increase the challenging behavior. Which are those conditions? Is when the punishment is unfair, when it's not proportionate, when the punishment does not occur immediately after that and breaching behavior took place. And recently, there is a debate about legitimacy that mentions a very different argument. And that argument mentions that the legitimate authorities and fair processes are more deterrent than the punishment. So there we open a research question that was, can we trust in the punishment in the school system, yes or no? How much can we trust on that? What choices can there exist to the punishment? Previous evidence suggests there is a strong association between school punishment and some negative externalities. Which are these negative effects? I will group them in 3 dimensions. In a behavioral dimension, the punishment or more punitive strategies increase the challenging behavior. They're linked with school dropout, delinquency, and aggressiveness. In terms of academic output, they deteriorate the learning, they alienate people, lack of motivation, and low performance, school performance. And inclusion, when it's punitive, the punishment offer and generate conditions so that individual has less opportunities to have higher education and qualified jobs. So there were certain elements that allowed to say that at least the school system seems that punishment is not as efficient or successful on deterring people in terms of how they behave or to inhibit the breaching behavior. But the bad news is that still we are far away of establishing cause and effect relationship between these variables. What does it mean? That they are associated, but we don't exactly know whether the punishment is what triggers all these negative effects. And that happens at least by 2 main reasons. First, the design of research that had been used so far are not as powerful so as to reach those conclusions of cause and effect nature. And secondly, because the way of doing so implies certain restrictions or ethical barriers that we can skip. The way that we can discover whether one behavior is the cause of another is basically the development of an experiment. In an experiment, as it happens in natural sciences, we have a control group and a treatment group. Both groups are similar at the beginning. One group, I offer an intervention. After a while, I compare those groups. And if there's any difference between the groups, I can conclude, if these are positive, that the treatment worked. To do that with punishment is quite difficult. It would be very difficult to convince a school system, parents, or researchers also, that we will randomize this punishment to some of them will be punished and others will not be punished. And after a while, we'll check what happened with these individuals to know whether, in fact, punishment had a positive, negative, deterrent effect or not. So we have a limitation that is key. And in that debate, we did a study so as to assess the impact of punishment, skipping several methodological, ethical, and practical barriers. And by using a longitudinal survey, what we did was to modulate longitudinal data and to simulate an experiment based on this longitudinal data. The data are a representative sample of 1,400 students, roughly speaking, in Zurich. 49% of them are children, minors, and this study began measuring when the children enter the school system at 7 years. And nowadays, there is a new measurement that is when the same individuals, after a long number of years, they are 21 years old. So we use that longitudinal information so as to model this type of experiment. The method that we use, propensity score matching. What we did was to take minors that at 11 years old had been subject of punishment and to see whether those children that after 11 years were subject of punishment had a different behavior after 15 years old. Not at the same time, but in a time afterwards. So we use 4 data waves. With first up to the 4th, you have the average age of the children in each of those waves. The first 4 data waves, we use them for predictors of this model. And in the wave number 5, we measured, that is to say, the management of this treatment, that was the punishment. And in the wave number 6, we measured the outcomes. So I said that we found 138 children that had been subject of punishment. The problem that we had is that the groups were not similar. And that was a key element in order to do the comparison. As you can notice in the table, they were dramatically different. In a statistical comparison, we found that both groups were significantly different. Those that were subject of a punishment had higher scores in perpetration of bullying, learning problems, delinquency, abuse of substance, self-control, participations in gangs, etc. So this comparison was not going to be fair. And that's why we use the statistical element that allow us to balance this group. The variables to balance this were 21. There in the screen, we have several characteristics where we tried that the children 11 years old were similar. To make the model more robust, we model behavior trajectories. Not only I want to know whether the children was aggressive last year, but I want to know whether from 7 years onwards until 11 years, how was the aggressivity level was. So we model trajectories for aggressivity. We have 4 trajectories. The first 2, the green and the blue, corresponds to most of these students, about 80% that had flat scores in terms of aggressivity, but the red line that corresponds to 11% of the sample tell us that there is one group that throughout time increases the aggressive behavior, and the yellow one decreases. The same thing is what we did with attentional deficit and with pro-social behavior. All that information was included in the model so as to try to have a balanced group. Once we did it, we obtained, and that is an example, we don't have all variables because they couldn't be in the screen, but we made the groups to have the same propension to the item. That is the name of the technique, propensity score matching, and that were similar. In other words, we had 138 children that were punished, and in the rest of the participants in the pool, that about 1,400, we searched for children that were not punished, but that had similar characteristics. The method worked, as you can see here, in the right side of the table. When we did t-test, we observed that all the groups that in the first line, for instance, self-control, before there were difference in the scores. Afterwards, the simulation, those differences dropped and the groups were similar. So I explained this so as to tell you that we were able to model statistically these 2 groups of treatment and control. What is more relevant are the outcomes, and you might wonder, what happened? This is what happened. In this chart, what you can notice are 2 lines. A red one that accounts for the treatment group that were punished, and the blue that were not punished, the control group. There is time 1 and time 2. Time 1, at 11 years old, you can notice that aggressivity was quite similar. The scores were quite similar. However, in time 2, after the punishment, we noticed that there is a difference in the means and aggressivity scores. Aggressivity increased for the groups of the children that were punished. And we wonder what happened with delinquency. The same thing. Time 1 accounts for 11 years and time 2 accounts for 15 years old. At 11 years old, these 2 groups were similar. At 15 years old, those that were punished increased their behavior, breaching the law. Conclusion, the initial results suggest that the punitive actions in the school can increase antisocial behavior in the future, and that is not an idea of our own study. There is a major group of studies that have reached similar conclusions. Also, besides this finding, highlight the relevance of non-punitive interventions as a means to prevent future antisocial behaviors. But the question that emerges is, which are those choices or alternatives? What happens if punish are more severe? What happens in the extreme of this institution when the punishment arrives at highly punitive level? So we decided to explore the school suspension. School suspension usually is one of the most severe punishments in the school system, and is a sanction imposed as a reaction to disciplinary problems. Not always is that, is an ideal, determined by a relevant authority of the school that explains the exclusion of the children from this regular school activity for a period of time. That can be permanent. It is excluded on a permanent basis from that school. Of a certain duration, is sent back home for 5 days so that they can reflect and then they come back to the school system, or it can be excluded within the school. I saw in London, in several of the schools that I visited, due to a field work that we did, that was something that was called seclusion unit. So these are rooms where we have small cubicles, where there is a desk, and the only thing the student can do in that small space is to do homeworks and to study. And if the student has been suspended from school for a certain period, he or she must be in that period in that small room. From the 1990, the school suspension or exclusion, as was called in other systems, has become the star stool of zero tolerance policy due to the increase of the school violence, linked also to events such as Columbine or other shootouts that have taken place inside schools. The authorities, at least in the United States and in some developed countries, have chosen very harsh policies, zero tolerance policies, the assumption of which is none of those adaptation to the school norms will be tolerated. So there is a severe punishment such as the school suspension. Chile also has the safe classroom that has the same characteristic. It defines that sanction. It provides the to the school president so that they can suspend due to a very specific causes as the one that are in the slide. When we observe the data, what we concluded is that they do not suspend only due to a behavioral problem. It is true that they're suspended those who have behavioral problems, that the data also tell us that the students that are suspended more regularly are ethnic minorities, adolescents as compared to minors, males as compared to females, those who have lower social economic status, and those who have special educational needs. It is quite interesting because in a comparison throughout different countries and different societies, the issues of ethnic minorities is similar. In children are the black students, and United States Afro-Americans. In Switzerland, these are those that come from Asian countries. So it seems that the fact of being an ethnic minority repeats regardless of the ethnic distribution in a society. For instance, in the United States, we have seen that the black people have 3 times more choices to be expelled from school as compared to white people, and 4 times more chances of being suspended in the school system in multiple occasions as compared to white students. In the students, there is a school of debate and thought that is called school-prison pipeline that I tried to translate from school to jail. And what they propose is that the trend is disproportionate, that the adolescent of impoverished contexts end up without the freedom is linked to the punishment in the school. So it seems that for some of those who are more punished, there is a back door that takes directly from the school to the jail. And this, again, is detailed in the evidence. The suspended student has twice more chances to involve in problems with justice. Challen and Walton in 2004, 80% of the subjects in prison have been excluded from the school in the past. Markson also mentions that adolescents that are behind the bars, 6% was never suspended, 32% was suspended outside the school, and 14% was suspended inside the school. In a meta-analysis in 2015 that includes 34 studies, doctor found that the suspension is associated with a reduction of the marks. So it has an impact on learning. School suspension also is associated with an increase of the dropout of 28%. So if these are enough reasons to doubt about the punitive strategy, so we have economic reasons. The economic cost of exclusion is quite high. There was a study in the United Kingdom that calculated with the expenditure in all this system of the state that the value of an excluded child could be 63,000 pounds, which is about 63 million pesos. The same thing happened in a study that was done in the United States. The cost of exclusion or school suspensions, $11 billion. Reducing this rate of suspension can save billions of dollars or pounds or pesos as you wish. So, and to end with this presentation, because I think I have only a few minutes, this last thing we did in regards to this issue was to develop a meta-analysis that allows to identify what can we do to reduce school suspension. That is the first meta-analysis, and we develop as a team with people appreciated by me, Manuel Aster, Devin Farrington, Maria, and Alex Sutherland. That was a very hard work that took a while to do. We did many search, and the main goal was to determine the impact of the intervention and reduction of school suspension that include only control and random experiments, because we wanted at the first time to find the best possible evidence. Search on 27 database, we had about 2,000 or 3,000 papers that we reviewed, and at the end we kept 37 studies. What happened after all this effort? We found that the intervention is a school that can reduce school suspension, and they can reduce it in a smart manner, about 20%. Findings, the intervention can drop significantly. The suspension rate is about 20%. And they have more impact in the permanent suspension or the expelling from the school. In secondary school and in male population, and the training for skills for the teachers and mentorship had more stable effects. Here we have the outcome in terms of figure. As I said, the best impact was for the case of expulsion and suspension in the school, and these are the intervention and the score each of these interventions had. When I say, and here we have highlighted in black, tutoring and violence reduction. These programs have the biggest scores, the ones that they behave the best in terms of the suspension reduction. But also we have other programs, such as training of the skills for the teachers. It seems that it is not only that the disproportionate use of punishment, punitive punishment, not only has to do with the behavior of the student, it has something to do with the teachers and with the whole school system. When we have teachers that have better bonds with the children, we have less violent behavior. And it's a result that I didn't see here, but it's a paper that is under review at this time. And we discovered that there is a better attachment with the teacher. There is less disruptive behavior. So to provide tools to the teacher doesn't mean that we make the teachers responsible of all violence prevention, but it provides to give some elements that allow him or her to have a better bond with the students. We have better bond with those who know, who are similar to us, with those who understand. So the teachers can understand in better manner the diversity of the students that arrive to the schools with diverse problems and levels of vulnerability. Probably we can do something that allows to keep the students in the school system. Also, in the same line of work, we wrote this effective violence prevention. The guideline is in German, Italian, French, and Spanish. Unfortunately, so far we have not been able to find a partner so as to have it in Spanish. But for all those who want to have access, it is available in the Violence Research Center of Cambridge University. And this guideline summarizes a huge number of interventions that can help to prevent violence. We have worked from schools, but the truth is that violence has to be prevented from different spheres, not only the school, not only police, not only early prevention or development of parenting skills. public approach, comprehensive approach is necessary for violence prevention and delinquency prevention, and the outcome that affect the whole community, not only the most vulnerable ones. So, to end with my presentation, the news. I cannot say that punishment must not be used. It is not my role. But what I can tell you, it seems that evidence tells us that punishment not always have the deterrent role that we were expecting from it. Secondly, that I can tell is that there's certain evidence of things that we can do and that can work. And finally, I would like to share with you, the Global South has a challenge that cannot be left aside. I would like to share a couple of images. In the first map, you can notice the size of the countries, defined in regards to the number of scientific evidence that take place. As you can see, the North, United States, European countries, has a huge size as compared to the countries of the Global South. The second map tells us where we have the biggest prevalence of the problems that require evidence to be solved. And unfortunately for us, for all the ones that come from the Global South, it seems that there is where there's more problems and less evidence. What I've shared with you, unfortunately, not always includes evidence from Latin American countries because there's not much. Research is not done. It is difficult to get the data. But of course, I would be very happy to contribute so that this map and this lack of proportion can have a change in the future. Thank you.